Hey, Claudia.
Hi, Chelsea.
Are you in the snow? I saw beanies and mittens.
Yes. It's
Where at?
Lake Tahoe. It's crazy out here.
Oh my gosh, is it snowing right now?
Yeah. We're coming back. There's a storm.
Yeah, it's gonna start storming over here pretty soon, probably within the hour.
I'm driving super, super slow.
Oh, how cold is it over there? What's the temperature?
Minus, no, it's 16.
Oi, that's
Mhm.
cold. Did you snowboard or ski?
Ski.
Chelsea, please put yourself on mute.
Okay. Hi, Herms. How you doing? Her phone's connected.
How's everyone doing? Cool. Can you guys hear me okay? Nice. Did anyone recently renew their license? I just went through it. And I'll tell you, my shoulders feel like there's a load lifted after renewing my 45 hours. Now, a little bit more of a burden on me than on you, because if I don't renew my license on time. When my license expires, so does yours. So I wanted to make sure everyone had a valid license, and I still had a month leeway, but I always get a little concerned if I don't renew it right at the 3-month in advance window. So
Well,
anyway.
thank you, Mike. I appreciate you taking care of me.
Well, I'll tell you that it takes a lot for me to just devote time to sit down in front of a computer to do quizzes and exams.
Yeah.
And then once I sit down and do it, I don't want to stop. I just want to go through it, but they stop you.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it dragged on a couple of weeks, but anyway, I finished last night, and I think I might have even did a little skip after I closed my computer. But anyway,
Oh, good.
so that was my little story to share. You know what? We got a lot to cover, so I have 1 o'clock, and I respect your time for showing up on time. So we're going to get going. What I want to make sure is I want to cover specifically your questions, your concerns in this class. So if you, is there anyone that has something that they want to make sure that we cover either today or tomorrow? We're going to do 2 hours today, and we're going to finish it up tomorrow with 2 hours, both 1 to 3 p.m. So I'm going to open it up to you guys. Please, if there's something that you'd like me to cover, or if there's anything in our class that we want to do, we're going to talk about the residential purchase agreement, the CAR version, and we're going to cover it kind of line by line. So this is your class. You're going to direct what you want as part of the curriculum, or specifically addressing what you like to cover in the contract. So I'm going to open up to you guys. Is there anything that you would like me to make sure that we cover in the next 2 days? Don't make it too easy for me, guys.
I always, me, Mike, I always want to know, what are those stupid mistakes that, that you don't even think about and you just make them? I mean, what are the most common ones because you're looking at a lot of contracts, and I know what personal peeves I have, but I want to know what are some common mistakes that could cost me either money or my license or.
Well, I'll go over a couple of mistakes that the offices have made in the last few months that could have been writing a check to our client on that. Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Anything else anyone wants to cover more specific?
Hi, Mike. This is Herms.
Hi, Herms.
Hi, I just this is kind of like a gray area for me. So if we can cover it today and tomorrow regarding new discoveries, like how it's a norm that the sellers provide it, while it's not a requirement, but here in our market, it's a norm that they provide inspections and all that. So if we're representing the buyer and the buyer does their own inspection.
Okay.
Sorry,
All right.
sorry about my dogs. Hold on.
That's okay. I'll new discoveries, disclosures. Okay, we'll cover. I'll try to cover that.
Thank you.
Good.
Hi,
And what constitutes a new discovery versus and a change versus keeping the contract and the timelines the same. Okay, what else?
Hi, Mike. I have 2 specific situations. One is basically the new buyer representation form. If we have that signed with the buyer, then how do we, which boxes do we check in the RPA?
Okay.
I think there are some boxes. First situation is that. Second situation is, recently I came across one buyer. He wanted to write up an offer for a new construction, which was actually, it was not new, it was just like 2 years old. But the listing agent told me that there won't be any 10-year warranty. So how do we protect our buyer? With just a 2-year-old townhome with no warranty from the builder. And I mean, in my understanding, there is always the civil code. It's like, there's always like a 10-year warranty.
A new construction, but you still told me it's not new construction.
Yeah, it's like 2-year-old home.
Well, there's a difference between new construction and 2 years old.
Yes, so it's a
Yes.
2-year-old home.
Yeah.
And the concern was that if there is no builder's warranty, first of all, why there is no builder's warranty? And if the buyer would still like to pursue the home, then how could we protect the buyer with that warranty piece, which he was concerned about?
Okay, you know what? That's really specific. That we'll go offline and talk about that.
No
I
problem.
don't think that really pertains to the purchase agreement.
No problem.
What-
Thank you.
But I will cover it with you separately.
Okay.
What else? Anything else? All right. Well, let's get started. Let me talk a little bit about ground rules and things like that. First, we're gonna go till 3:00. I respect your time. I'm gonna try to do my best to stop at 3. Second of all, we're not gonna have a question and answer period. If you have a question, just talk about it and we'll go through it. That way, when you ask a question, it might help other people that might be having the same question about it and might help them as well. The more questions you ask, the hopefully the more information that you can get out of this. And I can't guarantee that I'll know the answer, but I will do my best to get you the answer by tomorrow. And if I can't get a question comes up tomorrow and I don't know the answer, I will let you know what it is as soon as I get the correct information. So with that, what I'm going to do is basically let's get into it. The first thing I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to share the purchase agreement. And we're going to be talking about the California let me see. Hold on one second. Guys, can you see the screen?
We see it.
All right,
Yes.
perfect.
Yep.
And the purchase agreement?
That's right.
Great, okay. So again, this is the CAR version of the purchase agreement. We kind of have a couple different purchase agreements in the area, mostly the second purchase agreement, which is from the PRDS is mostly found up the peninsula, but that's another widely used purchase agreement. For the most part, the CAR RPA is used by most people, but you might see a listing that says, please use the PRDS contract. There are some differences. They're subtle, but they could be extreme differences that are between the two contracts. Today's class is just on the CAR purchase agreement, and we find that in our win forms, and everyone that works for our office is a realtor. That means that they belong to your local association, and then automatically you belong to CAR, California Association of Realtors, and also NAR. These forms are controlled and designed by the California Association of Realtors, and you get it online, and they have every form that is needed to conduct a transaction in the state of California. So this is this form is in zip forms. You'll see some, so in Win forms, you'll see some information that I already put in the contract, and the purpose of that was that I can save it and share it. If I didn't put any information down, you'd have a big sample across the screen, and I think it's a little bit easier to read with a couple of things put in the contract. So anyway, without further ado, let's get started on this. And again, if you have a question, please blurt it out, and we'll go from there. Okay, everyone ready to go? Cool. All right. So the first things first is in the contract, you'll see the date prepared. That date, simply you put the date that you're writing up the offer. It means nothing other than it's just a reference to the contract, and you'll be using that date as the reference for the purchase agreement dated blank between so and so and so and so. So you put a date down, and again, it means nothing as far as the contract goes other than just a reference date. The next line is, this is an offer from, this is where the buyer or buyers go. Now, what I didn't say when you're writing up the offer, it's a little bit easier to use the cover page in Win Forms, and then once you put the information down on the cover page, it'll auto populate the purchase agreement. So the cover sheet has room for 2 buyers. If you were to put more buyers in there, you could use a form that is called additional buyers. And there's also another form called additional sellers. So what's important with the buyers is that you need to put down all the buyers that are going to be buying the property. Is there, can you have, let me ask a question, and I would like some cooperation on this. Feel free to answer. Can we just have, say, a married couple with just one, the husband or the wife, on the offer form?
No.
Okay. Who says no and who says yes?
I say yes. It's Valerie.
All
I
right,
say
Okay.
no firms.
gotcha. So the answer is it is dependent on who is getting the loan.
Yeah.
So if both husband and wife need to get the loan together, then you need both parties on the offer. If, in some instances, one credit score on the spouse is worse than the others and can't get the loan, if both spouses are in there, it's okay to put the one that qualifies for the loan. The other person can, or anybody can be added in the future to add it onto title. So the answer is, it depends, and you need to talk to your lender, person that is going to be your partner in this, in determining if both buyers or one buyer is going to be on the offer. And the way, a lot of times we put 2 buyers on the property, and one needs to be taken off because they are hurting the chances of getting the loan, and that can be done with a simple addendum after the fact on that. So, and as well as adding, you can add someone during the escrow period or after close of escrow. During the escrow period, you put an addendum together, adding the person as the buyer, or after close of escrow, anyone can be added by going down to the county and recording the additional name. So the only thing I ask, if you're adding a buyer after the initial acceptance, is I want the buyer, or even if you have a listing and a buyer is added, I want that buyer to sign all the disclosures so that they have viewed all the disclosures just like the original buyer on the property. Any questions on that?
No questions.
Okay, so the next thing, 1B, is the it defines what the buyers are buying. So the first things first is the address, where it's situated, in what city, the county, and the zip code. You could get the APN number or assessor's parcel number. What's the easiest place to get that number?
The MLS listing.
MLS listing will have that APN number in there. So it's does it need to be done? No, but it just kind of it's a blank space that can be filled out, and there's nothing wrong with adding the APN number to the existing address. Let's see what else. I do think now that the wind forms allows 2 APN numbers. So if there's a 1, 2, 3, 4 Main Street, but it's 2 parcels, I think you have the ability to add both parcel numbers onto that RPA. Paragraph C, it's just putting everyone in notice that the terms of the purchase agreement, and the terms of buying the property, is going to be in the forthcoming pages. And paragraph D reiterates that the brokers and agents are not parties to the agreement, just the buyers and the sellers are. Why is that important? That is important really for a lawsuit purpose, that buyer and seller are the parties. And if there is a lawsuit against each other, you're talking about the winner getting their attorney's fees paid for by the losing party. With brokers and agents that are not parties to the agreement, everyone pays their own attorney's fees. That helps us, guys, in terms of getting less involved in lawsuits. We still get plenty of them, but if we didn't have that, which years ago we were parties to the contract, and it worked out in our interest not to be parties of the agreement. Any questions on paragraph 1?
Yes, Mike,
Yes.
question. Earlier you mentioned that during the escrow, you can add additional person's name on it to the addendum.
Or take someone out, yes.
Yeah, and how is that different from just put that name on the, from the beginning?
Well, you know what, sometimes, and I'm gonna project that, there may be occasion when a father might have to be added as a buyer to get the loan, and then maybe the father wants to not just co-sign it, but wants to get be an owner of the property, and that's, you know, in case it's added in that regard. I don't have any specific. I can't think of any specific reasons to add someone other than needing financial help, and they want to co-sign and as well as be an owner. So that would be one instance. Taking someone off of the contract, same thing. If they can't qualify with the 2 people on there, and someone needs to be taken out in order to qualify for the loan, that's where that would come into play. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that have happened over the years, but I can't think of anything other than those 2 circumstances, which.
Mike, I have a quick example. I was preparing an offer, and one of the spouses was traveling internationally and had very difficult time to do any access to the internet. And
Right.
so the husband actually had his name put on the contract in order to get into contract. And then later on, the wife was going to be added by addendum. So, yeah.
Another reason, that sounds great. Okay, let's keep, did your question get answered?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
good. Let's get into agency, and the first things first, there's an agency that is attached to this contract, and it's disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships. One is attached to the purchase agreement. Another one is an agency is attached to the listing agreement. So both clients will sign an agency. That's in paragraph A. Paragraph B is a confirmation of agency as to who represents who. And if there's one mistake that's pretty consistent in reviewing the transaction, it is paragraph 2B where I find the majority of the mistakes of filling out this contract. Mistakes could mean putting in the wrong information or leaving it blank. That both are incomplete and a mistake. And there are court cases where when this confirmation is not completed, the seller was able to fight paying a commission and no commission was paid. So this is an important paragraph. Spend a minute to go over it to make sure that you're doing it right. And if you get a love letter from me and file a review, it's really to make sure that we save our commission and that the seller doesn't have a legal out in order to compensate us. So what constitutes a correct confirmation of agency? Number one is the seller's brokerage firm is completed. If you look to the right, there's a license number that needs to be inputted in. Look below the name of the company and you see some check boxes that needs to be completed. Look below seller's agent. The individual agent would go there. Next to that would be the license number. That needs to be completed, as well as the check boxes. Same thing under buyer brokerage firm, the company, the license number, and the check box. Buyer's agent, the name, the license number, and the check box. So what constitutes a seller? Who's representing the seller, who's representing the buyer, or both parties? Considered dual agent. Those are the options for the checkbox. If the same person in your office or you are representing both the seller and the buyer, that is called dual agency. So let me repeat that. If you have a colleague in your office, your individual office, that is dual agency. You represent both parties, that is dual agency. Someone that is working for, say, Keller Williams Realty Silicon Valley as a seller, and the buyer is Keller Williams Realty Gateway, that is not dual agency. Another example, Keller Williams Realty Gateway is the seller. Keller Williams Realty Los Gatos is the buyer. Do we have dual agency?
No.
No, it's two separate companies. So we do not have dual agency, and the individual check boxes of the seller and representing the buyer are individual and they're separate. Okay.
So that's not defined by the broker?
It is defined by the company and the license number.
All right. Cool.
Okay,
Thank you.
so someone from Santa Cruz and someone from Gateway, that's two separate companies that you do not have dual agency. Okay? Any questions on that?
Got it.
Okay. I hate to just
Sure.
beat this to death, but I'm telling you, I get if out of the mistakes made in reviewing a contract, I would say over 50% of the mistakes are in paragraph 2B. Okay,
I have a question. So each marketplace has its own license number. So that's how
Yes.
it's identified. Okay.
yes, and every Keller Williams Realty office is a separate company.
Okay. Got
Okay,
it. Thank you.
sure. And the way to find that out, where do you find these numbers?
MLS.
On the MLS. You should have that MLS printed out right by your side when you're writing up the offer, or in a separate screen to make sure that the information that you get is the same as what you put in the RPA. Okay, paragraph C. on occasion, you may have another agent that you're either co-listing the property with or representing the buyer from a different company. And there could be two companies as a co-list, and that's where paragraph C would come in. Okay, and then you would use the form, if you check the box under seller or buyer, automatically the form ABA, which is the additional broker acknowledgement, will show up. You could do another co-list with an agent in your own office. That would not be an additional broker acknowledgement, but that would be an additional agent acknowledgement. And both those forms are in WIN forms. So, but only paragraph C is talking about if there's more than one brokerage. Okay, paragraph D. This is a disclosure and consent form that you may represent more than one buyer or seller in multiple transactions. And this originally was developed because there was a lawsuit where someone from Coldwell Banker was representing a buyer, and someone else, another agent from Coldwell Banker, same company, was representing another buyer, and one buyer had to pay extra money to get it, and there's a tune of had to pay $400,000 more, but they got the property. And a couple of years later, we had the .com bust in 2000, and so that buyer who paid $400,000 more sued Coldwell Banker and said that you have a fiduciary relationship to me, and you cost me $400,000. The premise was that a company could only represent one buyer or one seller at the time. We laughed at that as I was a manager for Coldwell Banker back in the day, and all the judges' rulings ruled in favor of the client and against the company. So Coldwell Banker settled, paid, I think, a check for $400,000 to settle the dispute. And all of a sudden, this form came in existence to let people know that we are going to be representing as an office more than one buyer or more than one seller at a time. Now, I want to be clear on this. This is for really the company representing more than one buyer or seller. I do not want you as an individual to represent two buyers on the same property. You physically can't have a fiduciary duty when you're representing two buyers on the same property. People can argue that yes, I can. The answer is the court will say, no, you can't. So again, having this form, possible representation of more than one buyer, one seller, it's for the company, not for you as an individual. You can represent multiple buyers, but they better be on different houses, not on the same house. I want to make sure we're clear on that. Everyone understand that, the difference?
Yep.
Clear.
Okay, good. I don't want to be in front of a judge arguing that we have fiduciary duty to two buyers on the same property, because we'll lose on that. Okay. That takes care of paragraph 2. We're rolling along, guys. I said that as kind of a joke, but anyway, let's get into paragraph 3, which is a great paragraph because it puts a lot of items in one paragraph, centrally located to put the information down. It's not the cure-all for all the information on the contract. You need to go through, as a representing a seller or a buyer, the complete contract, because a lot of the paragraphs that we're going to be reviewing tomorrow deal with these terms of paragraph 3. Okay, so the first thing let's let's review this paragraph and talk about it. So if you look at the top of the paragraph, it goes down A through all the letters, but it makes reference to, for example, paragraph A, the reference is to paragraph 5 of the purchase agreement, and the term of this is the purchase price. Terms and conditions identifies broken down those terms, and then additional terms to the right of that. So we have four columns. So the paragraph A deals with what's the purchase price, and we put down that purchase price. And if it's going to be all cash, we check the box all cash. If it's not, then we're going to deal with paragraph E, which is going to be the loans. Okay, so that's paragraph A, is the total purchase price. Paragraph B is when is it going to close of escrow? You have two options here. You can either check the box and how many days after acceptance, or you check the box for the actual date. I don't care, whatever pleases you tickles me. The one thing that I want to make sure, so that there's no confusion, if you put a date on the offer and say right now we're at the end of January, we're at end of February, and we put a date of, say, March 15th as a close of escrow date. If we spend 2 weeks negotiating back and forth and we haven't addressed it in the counter offer, and we have a checkbox with the actual date of March 15th, and we consummate the deal on March 10th, it's pretty unrealistic that you're going to be able to close on that date. So if you use the actual date, keep in mind your negotiations. If it drags on, you're going to have to address the close of escrow date on one of the counters. That's the only concern I have on that. Regarding if you put days after acceptance, and then it's going to be, we don't know when the acceptance date is going to be. Hopefully it would be the same day that you're writing up the offer, but a lot of times it's not. So what I do is if I have the days after acceptance, as soon as I get the acceptance, I look at when is that day going to, when is the close of escrow date? And there's some dates that there's some days of the week that we don't usually like to have as a close of escrow date. And what would be a couple of, give me some examples of days that just don't work for a close of escrow?
Monday.
Friday,
Just before a holiday,
before a
non-banking days,
holiday?
non-banking days.
Okay. Not entirely true, because there could be non-banking days. What's the determining factor as far as everyone's concerned? And you might be right, Steve, that it might coincide, but not necessarily. What days don't we close escrow on? Or what days don't we not record? How about that one as a little softball toss?
Holidays and weekends.
And why is that?
Those are not officially business days.
I don't care about business days.
Oh.
Why don't we record on those days?
You can.
Recorder's not open.
Close.
There you go, guys. I just heard it. Recorder's not open. So we can't close on days of the week where the recorder's not open. One day that always gets me, and I think it's at the end of March, is Cesar Chavez Day. That's a holiday celebrated in Santa Clara County, not necessarily all of California. So if we can't close where the property is located, that's a holiday. So I just look at the days of acceptance. I get my legal holidays that was supplied to me by usually my favorite escrow officer, and I look to make sure those days the day is gonna fall on a close of escrow date. So someone mentioned Friday, and I like Fridays. They're fine with me. I like to collect a commission check before the weekend. But what's the reason for Friday?
If you miss that date, particularly for funding, if they don't fund on time, then it rolls over not to the next day, but 3 days
Yep.
later, possibly onto Monday, assuming that's not a holiday. So you
Could
could be
be.
the next Monday or Tuesday, now you're 4 days out.
Yep. And my reply to that is make sure that it records on Friday.
Yeah. And
But-
also
But you're
the,
right.
the borrower, the buyer borrower could now owe interest if it funds late on Friday. And so they don't record, the lender is going to charge interest over the weekend. And in my opinion, 3 days out of a 30-year loan is nothing. And that's how I kind of counsel the buyer, say, hey, it's 3 days of interest out of 30 years, but they don't like the idea that they're paying for money over the weekend when they don't have use of it.
And that's specifically why I don't like Monday, because then you're guaranteed that it has to fund on Friday. Unless you could do a special, and there's no guarantee of that in some of these situations. So definitely Monday, definitely holidays, definitely the weekends, and Friday would be your choice on that one. But all I'm saying is you got to be cognizant, and when you put down days after acceptance, figure out what day of the week it's going to be, and if it falls on a Saturday or Sunday or Monday, talk to your other agent on the other side and come up to a solution on that. It might pay to be a Friday before, or a Thursday or a Tuesday, but it's usually not a problem for a close of escrow date if it's addressed on the front end. But when you're a few days away from close of escrow, there's a lot of things in motion, and that's where you're going to have some problems getting a cooperation from the other side. So as soon as the deal is accepted, then count your days and go from there. Okay, good. Paragraph C is the expiration of the offer. This offer is going to be great, and it will be expiring after 3 days after the buyer signs, or you could put a specific date down and a specific time. So the default on this is 3 days at 5 p.m. But you could change it to anything you want, and circumstances might dictate that it might be shorter or it may be longer. So it's not always cookie cutter, but plan your to amend the default if the circumstances arise. Initial deposit, paragraph D1 specifically, is the amount under terms and conditions, the actual amount of the purchase price is put down, and then it'll automatically figure out the percent of the purchase price. And that should be filled in. Typically, what are we seeing these days on an initial deposit?
3%.
3%. I've seen recently some amounts lower, and that's just based on probably the whether it's a seller's market or a buyer's market. But the important thing from a seller's perspective is that they want to see 3% either in paragraph D1 or D1 and D2, where there's an increase of deposit. Let's talk about increased deposit in a second, but let's get through the initial deposit. So say 3% of the purchase price, and that is going to be, the default is within 3 days, and it's going to be done by wire transfer. So can you change the default from 3 days? Is 3 days in some aspects maybe a little bit long? And if
Yes,
you
you
want
can
to make it 1 day, you can make it,
1 day.
you could fill in that number to be 1 business day after acceptance. And then by wire transfer, you need to talk to your buyer about that. Is he comfortable with a wire transfer? If not, you need to check the box and put something in there. Understand, if you leave it alone by wire transfer and the buyer is going to be doing something else, you're changing an agreed upon terms and condition of this purchase agreement. You would think that it would be okay, but it's not. So if you have wire transfer in the contract, that's what the buyer has to abide by. Any changes to that must be agreed upon by the seller. So make sure you go over that with your buyer, that they're okay with wire transfer. If they're not, then check the box and see what they're gonna do. They might want to do a certified check. I've seen some contracts where they check the box and they put certified check or wire transfer so that the buyer has some flexibility. But what I want to make sure that you understand is that this wire transfer is a term and condition of the contract, that if that's what's going to be, that's the way it's got to be. Okay. It seems really simple because bottom line is you want to get the money in there. But what if someone sends a personal check in? It might take 7 days to clear. That's changing the terms of the agreement. That's all I'm saying. If the seller's okay with a personal check, the box is checked and the seller agrees to that, of what the buyer wants, that's fine. But just make sure you're following through as a buyer's agent, what's in the agreement. Okay? Any questions on that? Wire transfer,
I have a quick question. So
Sure.
in that case where it said or,
yeah,
if I fill in on that blank certified check, then my buyer can choose between the wire transfer or the check.
no. It's either a wire transfer,
Yeah,
except when you put or,
Yeah.
then that's what's going to be done. So if you want the choice,
Mhm.
check the box or and put in certified check or wire transfer.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to D2. This is what I said, in case that the initial deposit is not 3%, this is where the 3% total kicks in. So if there is going to be an additional increased deposit, you would check the box under D2 for increased deposit. Now, the important thing is with any increase in deposit that is not at the time of the purchase agreement, it needs to be part of liquidated damages. And the initial deposit is automatically part of liquidated damages, but nothing else is unless you make it part of liquidated damages. And the way to do that is in bold letters in D2, increased deposit, money placed in escrow after the initial deposit, use form DID, and which is the increase in deposit when that deposit is made. It used to be called an RID 11, but they changed it to DID. And what that does is acknowledging the increase of deposit, and it states that it's making it part of liquidated damages, just like the initial deposit does. If you don't have that DID form, that increase in deposit is not part of liquidated damages. And when I go over liquidated damages, I'll tell you the nuances of what the problem is when you make an additional deposit without that being part of liquidated damages. It could have a huge impact for the seller. So increase the deposit, yes or not, and then that number goes in just like the initial deposit. You fill in the number for next to the dollar sign what that number is, and then automatically will be the percentage of purchase price will be there. So most are not doing increased deposits. I would say out of the 10 that I just reviewed, 9 of them were 3% initial deposit. And if I probably did the last 30, it was probably 29 did the initial deposit of 3%. So, but just understand that you have to be aware of the how to utilize D2 and increase deposit. And the same thing under additional terms. So when does that increased deposit take place? The default is upon removal of all contingencies. You could check the box, and that could be on a certain date. Usually that would coincide with when the contingencies are to be removed. I like personally leaving it under just the upon removal of all contingencies. Any questions on increased deposit?
Mike, can you give us, what's a typical scenario where you would want to use an increased deposit?
You know what, to be honest with you, you know, with the contingency periods being so tight, it almost doesn't matter much, but the scenario 20 years ago was you had a 45 to 60 day close of escrow.
Mm-hmm,
You would get loan approval for 30 to 45 days.
mm-hmm,
And the benefit was that the buyer didn't want to tie up all the money for that length of time. But in this case, you're getting, you know, you're getting 10 days loan contingencies.
right,
You know, so, you know, that's why I probably see more of initial deposit being the 3%.
got it, thank you.
It could also mean, Valerie, that maybe the buyer doesn't have the 3% in his pocket. He might be getting money from a fund that might take 7 days to get the additional money.
Mhm.
And you know, he puts down the initial deposit of 1%, and the increased deposit's going to be coming in a couple weeks.
I see, okay.
It could be another. I mean, I'm just throwing things out there. I can't remember anything that would be the difference between initial deposit. It kind of be just in negotiations too,
Mhm,
on a seller's market versus a buyer's market.
Got
Okay, Mike, if the buyer wanted to show their, they are really serious to put in the offer, and then they want to put like, say, 30% of the total purchase. So in that case, is it, do we put like a 3% in the initial deposit and then the additional 27% on the increased deposit and all at the same day? The next day?
No, I would do that. Just the initial deposit would be whatever number you put in there. Understand that the seller only really cares about the 3%, because that's all they can go after if liquidated damages is assigned if the buyer defaults. So whether you put 30% down, that seller is not entitled to the 30%. He's entitled to the 3%. So in that scenario, if the buyer did breach the contract, 27% would be released to the buyer but the title company would do that. So you'd be fighting over to 3%.
Okay.
I don't know, Monica, if it's really that important as a seller's agent. If I see the $10 million in the bank account versus 3%, that's all we're going to be fighting for. It doesn't matter to me. I could see it being a show of strength to kind of separate you from the rest of the competition, but I would consult my seller as saying it really doesn't matter as long as there's 3% in there.
Okay, thank
But
you.
that's up to you and your buyer, and I would just counsel them, saying that it's really important that we put the 3% in and make sure that we show them that we have the $10 million in the bank.
Okay.
But I might be different than another listing agent that really goes hog wild over a 30% initial deposit. So just strategize with your buyer.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right.
I have a question, Mike.
Sure.
With the increased deposit, I do split the 3% between initial deposit and increased deposit, and I don't check the increased deposit box and I don't fill up the form. What would be the repercussions on that?
Is that what you do, or that you're just saying in that scenario, what would happen?
Because if I don't check it, that doesn't go on the liquidated damages for them, right? Is it beneficial for my buyer?
No, it's not, because you'll see in the contract when we get to it tomorrow on paragraph 5A2 is that if there is an increased deposit, it needs to have a DID form.
Okay, got it.
Okay. I mean, Let me tell you this, is it beneficial for the buyer? On a screw up like that? Yes. Is it beneficial for you as an agent? No.
No,
Because,
okay,
because number one is at close of escrow, I want my buyer to be tied to the property as well. He's
Okay.
had his due diligence. He's had his ability to get out of the contract. I personally don't want the house next door to come on the market the day before close of escrow at $25,000 cheaper. And the buyer says, hey, I want to take that buy. See you later. I'm doing a direct deal with the owner.
Okay.
I want him
Got
to
it.
have a little, he could be my best friend, but I want him to have a little skin in the game too. And
okay,
if he's willing to breach the contract, he should pay the price.
okay. So it's
Okay.
more beneficial for us from that
Well,
aspect.
it's from a psychological standpoint, it is, but also because we are, it says it in the contract that if there is an initial deposit, this needs to be done and completed, then we're not doing our job. The listing agent's not doing his job. We're not doing our job.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Let's talk about if there is a loan. So if the box is not checked all cash, then there's going to be a loan. And that's where E1 comes in. And it's going to be talking about the terms of the loan. So the first things first, it's going to be the amount of the loan, and typically 75-80% might be the loan amount. And you have a choice. It's going to be, if you leave things alone, it's going to be a fixed rate loan, or you could do an initial adjustable rate. If it's an initial adjustable rate, that's where the box has to be checked. If you're not checking that box, it's defaulting to a fixed rate loan. Then it also has not to exceed the interest rate. And this is important to put that down. If you're having a loan contingency, I want to see not to exceed number on there as far as an interest rate does. This is kind of a semi-contingency. In addition to the loan contingency, this is another contingency to protect the buyer in case there's a catastrophe on the financial market. Say we're looking at an interest rate of, say, I'm going to throw out a number, 5.75%, 5.75. And we need to put a number in there to protect us in case there's a catastrophe financially and the rates go overnight tomorrow to 10%. Has that house become more expensive to finance when you go from 5.75 or 6% to 10%? You betcha. So what this does, if you have a loan contingency, you want to make sure there's protection until you lock in the rate or until you remove the loan contingency. Okay, I hope that became clear. Let's put it this way, if there's no loan contingency, you don't need to worry about the interest rate because there's no contingency on that. It only deals with if there's a loan contingency. If there's no loan contingency, doesn't matter what the interest rate's going to be. This does not apply. It only applies if there's a loan contingency. So let's go through the rest of the terms, and then we'll get into specific things. So it's not to exceed a certain amount. The buyer to pay up to blank points to obtain the rate above. It used to be that you could put, the default is buyer to pay. The old way, it was almost referenced to 0 points, but now you could put as many points as you want to put down. And what is a point when it comes to a loan?
1%.
Well, it could be 2 points, but really it is a 1 point equals 1% of the loan, and that is called prepaid interest. And there's a direct correlation between interest rates versus points. The more points you paid or prepaid interest, the lower your interest rate goes down. Back in the day, back in the 80s, when the interest rates were 18%, you would pay points to buy down the loan. I did that because I couldn't qualify for my loan when the interest rate was at 17.75% when I bought my first house. I paid points to get the rate, I'll never forget this, 14.75. So I did that so I can qualify for the loan. I couldn't qualify at 17.75, but I could qualify at 14.75. I hope we don't get there, especially since the loan amounts are probably 10 times the amount of what it was back in 1981 when I bought my house. But that's what the points are for. And anyway, so you could put down, so it's 0, 1, whatever it is. And let me get back to the example on not to exceed a certain percent. So we had a deal a long time ago when the rates were about well, actually, the rates came back recently. It was about 7% loan. I'm going back a number of years, a long time. And the buyer and our agent did not put not to exceed, but they had a loan contingency. And the what happened was they in a couple within a week or 10 days after acceptance, the lender pulled a little switcheroo on the buyer saying that, you know, I can't get the 7% loan, but I got you I forget the number, 10 or 11% loan. And the buyer says, I don't want that. That's my cost now has gone up. I don't want this loan anymore. And I don't want the house anymore. And cancel the contract because I have a loan contingency. Well, guess what? Since that not to exceed number was not put in our contract, the buyer, our agent, and the buyer tried getting out of the deal, and the smart seller's agent said, okay, you're getting out because of the loan contingency. Show me that you got refusal from the underwriter and getting the loan. And we couldn't do that because the buyer still qualified for the 11% loan. So they were able to get the loan, not the number that they wanted. And our agent, if he protected our client, would have put a not to exceed number down at 7% and would have been fine, and they would have been able to get out of the transaction. But because they didn't put anything down, they qualified for the loan at 11%. The seller said, you got the loan. You can't use your loan contingency because you got the loan. And what wound up happening was at that time, we were using the initial deposit being a certain amount of money. I think in this case, it was only $5,000 and there was an increase in deposit. So we're only dealing with a low amount of money versus the 3%. So the buyer lost his $5,000 because he breached the contract. And what happened? The buyer got his $5,000 from the agent. So don't make that mistake. If you have a loan contingency on there, you better put not to exceed a certain amount of interest rate. Again, if there's no loan contingency, forget what I said, it does not apply. Any questions on paragraph E1? Do you see where this could be important to a client?
I have a
To
question.
represent? Yes.
What is the most common amount that you're seeing right now as far as a general number for percentage not to exceed?
I talk to your lender.
Okay, got it.
Talk
Thank
to your
you.
lender. And again, not to exceed. So if they quote you, say 6%, you got, and the buyer can qualify for a little bit more. I like to put a little wiggle room in there for market conditions. Can the market increase 1/8%, 1/4% over until the buyer locks in? Yes. So I'd like to, if my buyer can qualify for a 1/4% higher than what the normal term is today, I will put a little wiggle room in so I can ease the seller's agent in reviewing this offer. Conversely, if I'm the seller's agent and I see a not to exceed number and is right at where the market is right now, I'm going to question, and I talked to the lender and he said the current rates are 6% and they put 6% down there. I'm probably going to counter that because it's part of the term. And I find out that the buyer can qualify for more than 6. And I'll ask the lender, can the buyer, if the market goes up to 6 1/4, can the buyer afford that? And they tell me yes, then I'm going to counter that. So I don't have a number that is so low that one blip of Wall Street coming out and something happening and all of a sudden the rates go up 1/8%. I don't want an out for the buyer over something like that. And again, this is a mini contingency. So I want to protect my seller for market conditions.
Mike, I have a question on E1. Let's say loan contingency exists, I mean, is introduced and not to exceed, then we, as the buyer agent, then we think about, hey, what to write in not to exceed, and buyer to pay up to dash points to obtain the rate above, right? So instead of doing that, could we just go to the right, the box which is on the right, conventional, or if checked, and we check other, and then we write the, you know, the interest rate, and the points would be based on the market conditions in the.
Well,
Like,
the
could we do that?
problem with putting the market conditions, well, my scenario where it was at the financial collapse and the rates go from 5 3/4 to 10%. I define that as 10% is the market condition today, or whatever it is when it happens. So putting market conditions, as far as I'm concerned, eliminates the not to exceed number. The market condition is, it is what it is. I could argue that today it's at say 6%. Something happens where there's a terrorist attack and the rates go up to 10%. That's the market condition.
Oh,
That's it.
okay. So what you're saying is that not to exceed in this percentage, we consult with the buyer's lender.
Yes, absolutely.
And whatever the buyer's lender says, we write that percentage here.
Yeah, so my example is, say the current rate is 6%.
Right.
I'll ask the lender, can they afford 6.25? Can they qualify at 6.25 just to have some market conditions in there? Or 6 1/8. I put some sort of little wiggle room in there.
But then wouldn't that, asking that question to the lender could trigger higher interest, whatever that fractional interest hike, which
No, because it's saying not to exceed. It's not saying this is the interest rate. It's saying not to exceed a certain number.
Okay.
The buyer is still going to get what he can get. And if the market's at 6% or goes down to 5.75 and you have 6 1/4, it doesn't matter. It's a not to exceed number.
So
if the buyer can get, so the important thing in this, when you're consulting your buyer, just tell them this is not the rate that you're going to have. This is to protect you in case the rates go to 10% overnight.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Doesn't the rate lock kind of play in here too, though?
Yeah, as soon as the rate lock takes place, then you don't have to worry about this anymore.
Right.
But
Gotcha.
this is the protection between the date of acceptance and the late, and the rate lock, which could be 10 days from now.
Okay,
You
so,
don't know. Things could happen where the buyer says, I don't want to lock in right now because I think the rates are going to go a little bit lower.
oh, gotcha, gotcha.
This is a
Yeah.
protection. This is a protection that you're not protecting yourself over 1/8 of a point for market conditions. You're protecting against a huge
Yeah.
impact.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Mark,
Mike.
did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. I have
Okay.
another question, which
Okay.
just a mini one. It's the rate is decided by the lender based on the date on which the offer on when the offer is accepted or when the property is recorded.
No. The rate is determined when the buyer and the lender lock in the rate. You could have a date of acceptance,
Mhm.
and that rate is just gonna float until the buyer locks it in.
The buyer locks in the rate.
Buyer locks in the rate before the loan documents are drawn up.
But either ways, the rate is still, I mean, let's say the buyer is pre-approved like 6 months or like 5 months back, and the pre-approval is on the verge of expiring in a month.
Pre-approval has nothing to do with the interest rate that they're gonna get. It's based on the day that they lock in. That's whatever the interest rate is when they decide to lock in.
Oh, okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
And that's why it's really important when you're dealing with a buyer that's maybe has a pre-qual or pre-approval from 4 months ago. The rate, the market is, the loan market might be different from 4 months ago to today. So
Yeah.
it's important to get updated information from the lender.
Okay.
Mike, it is true that they can't lock a rate without a ratified contract, right?
Well, you know what? There are some lenders that have a kind of a lock and load where you could lock in your rate and then shop for a property for, you have a 45 days to get a property, but that's not the
Yeah.
general thing
Okay.
that happens. But there are some programs. I'm not aware of any right now, but there are some lock and shop type of deals they say. But that's not the general way that loans are presented right now.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question. So if my buyer is approved for 6% and then they can go up to 6.5. So I
They
say
can
not to,
CAN, they can.
yes, they
Okay.
can afford 6.5%.
Yeah.
So I say not to exceed 0.5% here
No,
or 6.5.
6.25 or 6.5. That's what you would put in.
Okay, and
But
then I click.
The important thing is that if you don't explain it to your buyer, they're gonna go nuts when they see that 6.5 saying that, hey, I got a 6% quote. And you have to explain to them not to exceed, that's the number. So, and you explain it saying that this is to protect you from a catastrophe. If the loan market changes overnight to 10%, we need a way to get out. Because you still may qualify, Mr. Buyer, at a 10% loan, but we want to make sure that we have the ability to get out of the deal until we lock in. Okay, that's the explanation.
Okay,
Guys,
and then
it's
we
not-
check.
Yeah.
We
Go ahead.
check initial adjustable rate also there.
Well, it depends. Are they doing a fixed rate, 30-year fixed rate, or are they doing a 7-year or 10-year arm?
Got it.
That has nothing to do with the high point of the interest rate that you want to protect yourself on.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
good. Thank you.
All right, cool. All right, so that takes care of the first the first loan, E1. E2 is if there's a second loan. Okay, and sometimes we have a package deal where it's maybe they're putting down say 15%. And there's gonna be a first loan of 80% and a second loan of, 5% or 10%, whatever, they might be putting down 10%, they're getting an 80-10-10. So 10% down, 80% first, 10% second. There are different numbers that the first loan is going to be at. The interest rate's going to be different on the first loan versus the second loan. And why is that? Why is there a difference between the first and the second?
Risk.
Risk. The first loan is in first position, and should there be the buyer not able to pay the loan and there's a foreclosure, they're in first spot, where versus the second could be they don't have that as much equity as the first. So that's why there's going to be a room for putting down different financial terms for a additional loan or a second loan. And the same information as in the first deed of trust, this is the second deed of trust in here. Okay, I missed a covering in E1 regarding that the default is that it's going to be conventional loan. If it's not a conventional loan, if it's an FHA or VA, then you would check the box on that. But the default in here is that it's a conventional loan on that. And then if there is a FHA or VA, then there's an extra requirement put on the house, and that is the condition of the home has to also be appraised, not just the value of the home that a conventional lender looks at. The FHA or VA might require repairs to be done. Usually they're safety repairs that need to be done in order to get the loan financed. And that will be a list of the lender required repairs will be delivered to the seller, and the default in this is going to be 17 days after acceptance. Again, this list, it's not requiring the seller to make those repairs. It's just saying that the repairs have to be done prior to funding in order to get the loan. So, and that applies to FHA and VA type loans. So the appraiser is looking at not just appraising at the purchase price, he's also looking at the condition of the home and making notes of that. Okay. Paragraph, I'm sorry, question?
Yeah, I have a question. If you check the seller financing, are there specific forms?
Yes.
That also?
Yeah, that'll spit out a seller financing form.
Strong winds.
Okay. And that seller financing form we'll talk about interest rates, we'll talk about the length of the loan, and talk about everything like that.
Okay, good.
Mike, I have a question.
Yeah.
Let's assume the fact that we submitted an offer with lender X for this buyer, and the offer gets, the seller is still deciding, what to, they're working on the offer, right? Making their choice. Now, the next day, the buyer gets back to me and says like, hey, you know what? I don't want to use this lender. I have a new pre-approval from a different bank because that's enticed me this rate and it's more, looks more better to me. I want to use this.
Okay.
Then we revise the offer, or we add an addendum, or how does it work?
Well, what I would do, you don't have to do anything. But if the offer is not accepted yet, I would inform the listing agent. You don't have to do that. But as a seller's agent, I don't want to be blindsided, because if someone's changing the loan after it's accepted, I view that as a weakness on a part of the, that's just my idiosyncrasies, that I look at that as, okay, in my mind, the buyer couldn't get the loan from the first lender, so he's going to a second lender. So I would be upfront and say, hey, I just want to let you know, this is the lender we're going to go through, and that way the seller's agent can do their due diligence on the with the new lender instead of the old lender. But that's me. Per the contract, there's nothing you gave a lender. I just wouldn't want to risk that the seller's agent's calling the old lender that I, as a buyer, I fired, and I don't want him to say anything. So that's why I would quickly give the updated information to the lender that I'm going to be using.
And what if this happens after the offer gets accepted?
And then I would just make a phone call and say, hey, we're going with a different lender.
Okay. Thank you.
And I give him that information as well.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay. All right. So the next thing, E3, is talking about the occupancy type. And basically there's three choices here. The default is that it's going to be their principal residence or primary, that they're going to live in the property. The second part could be a secondary house, like a vacation home, or it's going to be a rental. The third. Now the default is primary. And who cares about the occupancy type?
The lender,
The lender. Why?
because they charge a higher rate if you're an investor.
Because there's more risk. There's more risk to secondary or investment property than the primary residence, because the facts show that the default rates are higher. Or let's put it this way, the default rates are lower for a primary resident than any other type of property. And so that's why the lender needs to know what it's going to be.
What is a secondary home, Mike? Is it second home?
Yeah, second home. It could be the home in Tahoe, could be the home vacation home, could be whatever, wherever it's going to be.
And then later on, after the purchase of the property, the buyer, after a month, decides to make it an Airbnb or rent it out, then it becomes investment, right?
I mean, it could be a secondary home for them because they still could be using it as a vacation home. So I don't think any Airbnb. I would say that's a secondary home, because usually the owners use it for a period of time. I think that would be the difference. If it's going to be rented out all the time, then I would check the box investment.
Okay.
Okay, and then you have the balance of the down payment, and then the total purchase price.
Mike?
Question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, this is Steve. Regarding that last question, I
Yeah.
think agents should just be advised it can be a federal mortgage fraud if the buyer misrepresents the type of loan, the use of the property. So if you know that your buyer is potentially going to rent it out Airbnb or something like this, have them check with their lender to ask what the rules are, because according to that note and the deed that they sign, you don't want to knowingly violate that and be fraud.
I agree, Steve. I think it really comes down to primary versus not primary. And whether you check as a secondary and then do Airbnb and live in the property, I don't think that's a big deal, but it might be. So I concur with you to check with your loan officer what's the best classification for this property.
It's basically, the thing is, Mike, I have actually came across with people, even at the open houses sometimes, that they don't have a clear idea whether this home would be secondary or investment. I mean, they also decide on.
But they have a clear idea.
Decides,
But they have a clear idea whether it's going to be primary or not. Right?
Yeah, it's definitely not primary, but
Okay.
Is it secondary or not? I think, like, for many of the buyers which I came across, like, they leave it on time to decide.
I think, Art, the key that a lender cares about
Mhm.
is whether it's gonna be their primary residence or not. On
Okay.
that's the key, and I think that's what you have to, it's based on what the borrower at the time is thinking. I'll give you an example. Someone that lives in the affluent area of the best area, Saratoga,
Mhm.
and is going to be purchasing a house on Tropicana at Story and King, and they put primary residence, I got a feeling that there's something that doesn't smell right with that. So, I think the key is making sure that the buyer is not committing fraud in that case, and whether it's a secondary or investment, I think that might be splitting hairs depending on what the intent is at the time of writing up the offer. Let's move on. Yep. Okay. One last one.
Oh, I
Go
was
ahead.
just gonna say, I think as far as the lenders are concerned, anything that isn't a primary is an investment, whether they intend to live in it secondarily and allow it to gain equity or not. I think that that's all the same to the lender. If you're not, whether or not you're living in it.
That's the important thing is someone that is buying a property and they're saying it's their primary and it's not, that's fraud, and that's clear cut. So that needs to be, and we're not going to be part of that fraud.
And we get in trouble if they can prove that we knew about it, right?
That's absolutely, you're part of the fraud. Okay, let's move on. Next page. Seller credit to the buyer. So this is where if the seller is going to be paying for closing costs, this is where it would be in G1. And it would be, you fill in the number, you check the box, put in a number, and then in additional terms, it's going to be applied towards closing costs. Rarely do you put other things where you check the box other and put something down. An example would be that if, say, the seller is going to credit the buyer $10,000 for a new roof, you make that part of closing costs. If you check the box saying other and put roof, new roof, that's going to create a little bit of problem in terms of they're going to want to see lender's going to want to see the new roof put on before they're willing to give the money. So the easiest way is to put down closing costs. Now you're going to be limited to the amount of credit will be limited to the amount of closing costs. So talk to your lender about what the closing costs are going to be if you're negotiating for seller credit. In this contract, and we'll talk about 5E later on, if whatever's negotiated in this number is going to be limited to the amount of what the lender will allow. So say you negotiate $40,000 for a credit, but the total closing costs that the lender will accept is the total closing costs or non-recurring closing costs that the lender will allow is $20,000. That is all the seller is obligated to pay. He's not obligated to give the extra $20,000 to the buyer, because that would create lender fraud. So anyway, in dealing with the seller credits, talk to the lender about what is the allowable amount if you're going down that route. Okay. Paragraph G2 is any additional financing terms. Anything else that is not covered in paragraphs as part of the loan amount or the any other terms of the financing. G3. This is one of the new forms that was put in because of this buyer broker agreement. So this only applies if the seller is not paying the buyer's commission. Now, if it's on the MLS and there's the commission that's agreed upon that you're okay with and you don't have a buyer broker agreement, you leave this blank. If you have a buyer broker agreement, and the money on the MLS is not the money that you agreed upon with the buyer broker, then you would check this box and then you're asking for the seller to pay the buyer broker whatever's left over on the buyer broker agreement. So right now, if you don't have a buyer broker agreement, you go past this paragraph G3. If you have a buyer broker agreement and the commission to you as the buyer's agent is not covered in the MLS, then you would check this box and get that agreed upon. You guys understand the difference here?
Yes.
Okay.
And what if the compensate, the reward, the commission is same, which is 2.5 reflected into MLS and 2.5, the buyer broker agreement. That's the one which we signed.
Yeah, if you have a buyer broker agreement, it's 2.5%, and the seller in the MLS is paying the 2.5%, you skip this paragraph.
I skipped
Again,
this
this
paragraph.
only applies if
the
you have a
commission is
buyer
lower.
broker, if you have a buyer broker agreement
Mhm.
and the seller is not compensating you in the MLS. Or not the seller so much as the seller's agent is not compensating you on the MLS. That's when this would apply.
What if in the commission amount in the buyer broker agreement is lesser than what it has been offered at MLS?
Then you leave it alone. If it's reversed and the buyer broker agreement is less.
Buyer broker agreement has 2.5, Mike, and the MLS says 3%.
Then you're good, skip it. And the only you would check the box if the listing agreement, the MLS showed 2% and the buyer broker agreement was 2.5, you could ask for the extra 0.5% under this check in the box.
Okay.
If you're getting compensated, first of all, this would have to apply to a buyer broker agreement number one. If you don't have a buyer broker agreement, skip it. If you have, then you look at, if you do have a buyer broker agreement and the compensation under the buyer broker agreement is the same or less than what the commission's offered on the MLS, skip it.
Skip it. Okay.
If the buyer broker agreement is more than what the MLS is showing, then you could check the box and ask the seller to pay for the difference.
Okay.
All right.
Then in the second case, which you mentioned, the buyer broker agreement is 2.5 and the MLS reflects 3%.
Skip it, move on.
Skip it. Then how much are we getting paid? 3% or 2.5%?
What does the MLS say?
3%.
Then leave it alone. Now, it could be under the buyer broker agreement, you could have that you're getting 2.5%. Anything more that you get is going to be rebated back to the buyer. You need to make sure that is filled out correctly.
Oh, so we just word that in that agreement.
Word it out there.
Okay, and in the G1, Mike, recently there is like concept of, not recent, but it's actually pretty old too. The what is it called? The rate buy down.
Yeah,
buying down the rate.
Yep.
So of course the loan either could be fixed or either could be 7/10 or 10 and 10/1 arm, right?
Whatever it is.
So
the buy down would be under G1. That's where you put the amount down.
So how do we so we put the amount what? Of course we receive the amount from the lender. Then let's say if it's 6% and buyer wants 0.5% to be bought by the
whatever,
seller.
it's gonna be basically points. This is where the number would show. If it might be $10,000 of the buy down. You put the dollar amount down, whatever the lender and you and the buyer talk about.
So we click on other. And
I would leave it at closing costs. The buy down is part of closing costs.
Okay, I get
But
it.
talk to your lender about what that amount's gonna be.
Usually like what you have observed, like how much is it? Like,
Usually it's 3% or less.
oh, I mean, 3%, they could buy down so much? Oh, okay. Or less. I mean, that's still like a pretty significant amount, Mike. I mean, for,
Talk to your lender, Art.
okay.
Go to it.
All right, let's move on.
There you go.
H1, verification of all cash. This is if you check the box that this is an all cash offer, this is where the verification of all cash is going to take place. So no, the default is that it's going to be attached to the offer. Why is that important? As a seller, I want to make sure this guy's for real. The buyer's for real. So you have H1, the verification if it's an all cash offer. H2, a verification that there's a down payment and closing cost that the buyer has. Again, the default is attached to the offer. And then H3 is that letter from the lender. What is it? What kind of letter is it going to be? Number one is we want it attached to the offer. That's the default. But is the offer a pre-qual? Is it a pre-approval? Or is it fully underwritten by the lender? And you would check the box in one of those three. The problem is there's no legal definition of what a pre-qualification is versus what a pre-approval is. So I think as a seller's agent, you need to peel the onion back, talk to the lender and see what it really is. And there are letters that are addressed to whoever may concern. This person is pre-approved. Well, when you call the lender, it's really not a pre-approval, it's really a pre-qualification. So you're going to have to basically define what the buyer's agent is checking in the box and exactly see what apples to apples is on that. So there's no legal definition of this. Don't ask me what the difference is between pre-qual and pre-approval. In some instances, there's no difference. Other instances, they've gone an extra mile. The fully underwritten is pretty easy because they've gone to the underwriter and all the conditions are identified as to what it needs to be done. And it's definitely a step up from a pre-approval. I'm going to move on from there. So bottom line is check with the lender when you are a seller's agent. And also when you're writing up the offer, it's probably a good idea not to lead a seller's agent astray by just simply finding out what kind of letter this is. Paragraph J, the final verification of the condition. This is the walkthrough. Now the walkthrough here, it doesn't say 5 days or sooner or 5 days or prior to the CEO. This is actually saying 5 days. So the contractual agreement is backing off 5 days from the close of escrow. That's when the walkthrough is going to take place. Now it's different in the past. We've kind of done it a day or 2 or 3 before close of escrow. This contract is saying 5 days prior. I'm just letting you guys, making you aware of that. That's the contractual agreement that you guys have. Is that being breached? I would say yes, based on when I review the file and see the walkthrough the day or 2 before the actual close of escrow. Paragraph, yes.
We put like 3, like a range in there where it says 5, like 3 to 7, because I know that we rarely hit 5 days exactly in any of the deals I've done. It's always, somewhere around there. Should we just leave it at 5 or should we put like a 3 day?
I don't know if you could put 3-7 in that space. If you can, great.
Okay.
I don't know if software wise, if you could put a range for the days prior to close.
Would it be legit as far as the contract if it allows us to?
Yeah, that'd be great. As long as you put something down and both sides agree to it, I'm a happy camper.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Assignment request. In the past, the CAR purchase agreement allowed for an assignment where someone's assigning their interest or part of their interest in the property, and the seller could not unreasonably withhold that approval. Now, it's saying the assignment request has to be done within 17 days after acceptance. After 17 days, the seller does not have to give approval on that assignment request, and that'll be explained in paragraph 23 in more detail. So it's saying within 17 days after acceptance, the assignment shall not unreasonably be withheld. Now, what's an assignment? And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself with paragraph 23, but assignment could be something simple as having the spouse on the contract. That's a partial assignment. A more of an assignment would be a flipper that is trying to sell his interest of the property to someone else and not close on the property. That is also another version of an assignment. So in that case, the seller does not, after 17 days, does not have to approve the assignment on that.
And why,
Typically,
would they
hold on
not
one second, Meg.
approve?
Typically, if there's a spouse added or a co-signer added, the seller really doesn't care much, but he may care if it's going to be assigned to someone else, and that person that's assigning it is making money, and the seller is not. So that 17 days now is important. Question? No? Okay, let's move on. Okay, paragraph L. All the contingencies are in this section, paragraph L, 1 through 8. There are 8 different types of contingencies in here. Number 1 is the loan contingency. And if you notice, L1 through L8, it's all, or L7, it's all 17 days. Again, if you need to modify that, you change the default from 17 to whatever it needs to be. Number 1, L1 deals with the loan. The default is that it's going to be 17-day loan contingency. If you're going to not have a loan contingency, you would check the box, no loan contingency. Next step, L2 is the appraisal. The appraisal contingency is different than a loan contingency. The loan is getting a loan. The appraisal is that the appraisal is going to be at a certain price. So let's look under contingency. L2, the appraisal contingency is based upon the appraised value at a minimum purchase price, or a minimum of the purchase price, or check the box and put a number down. Say it's $1 million sale. If you don't check the box next to the dollar sign, you don't put any number there, that means that the appraisal contingency, it needs to appraise at $1 million. Say the buyer has $500,000 worth of down payment they're going to be putting in, and they don't care that the appraisal appraises at the purchase price. They just want to get a $500,000 loan. Then you could check the box and have a different number, that it doesn't have to appraise at the purchase price. It could appraise at, check the box and put a number down. It might be only 600,000, 700,000, whatever the buyer feels comfortable doing. Is there an advantage if you have an appraisal contingency to have that appraisal price lower than the purchase price? Is there advantage to the seller? Absolutely. It's less worrisome about having the house to appraise at the purchase price. So that's what you would use if there's more than the minimum down payment. If the seller is putting more than the minimum down payment down, you could use the check the box and put a value down. The appraisal contingency is 17 days default, or put a number in there. Or the second thing under contingency remove would be removing the appraisal contingency. Now, one caveat to that. If you're doing a VA or an FHA loan, VAC loan, by removing the contingency, the buyer removing it does not technically remove the contingency. There is no contingency removal from a VA or FVAC type loan. So that's in there under contingency removed. So a buyer can remove the contingency under a VA loan, but if the house does not appraise, he has the right to back out. Any questions on loan or appraisal?
Got it.
The rest of the contingencies, you need a contingency removal form. So you don't need a contingency removal form in L1 or L2. By checking the box under contingencies removed, you're set. Okay, L3 and L7 to L7, you need a CR form, a contingency removal form. And what is that? L3, investigation of property. That's the L4, review of seller documents. Those are the disclosures. L5 is the prelim. L6 is the HOA docs. L7 is the review of leased or lien items. The important ones that usually come about is the solar system. All those are 17 days. Can you change those dates? Absolutely. Make them more, make them less, depending on what's going on. The important thing is, say, let's look over L4, the review of seller documents, the seller's disclosures. The default is 17 days after acceptance. However, what if the seller doesn't give all the disclosures? Then if at day 17, if the seller gives disclosures to the buyer doesn't have to remove the contingency on day 17. He has 5 days after delivery. So if the seller gives the disclosures on days 12 or later, it's going to be 5 days after delivery of when the buyer has to remove the contingency. When does this usually come into play? This usually comes into play in L6 when you have HOA docs. And if the seller or seller's agent didn't do it in advance, it might take more than I think an HOA has 10 business days by law to provide the HOA docs. So it might come up to that 17 days by the time the buyer, again, 17 days, not 17 business days. So it may come up where the buyer has additional time to review that once it's 5 days after delivery. So anyway, so if you're removing any and all of these contingencies, you look to the contingency removed and you check the box CR attached, and that's where you would remove paragraphs L3 to L7. Now, if I'm doing a contingency removal form, I include the loan contingency and appraisal contingency on that CR form. I just think it's a little bit having everything on one form is a little bit easier. So, but you could, if you're not removing L3 to L7, you could have a no loan contingency and no appraisal contingency by simply checking the box and not having a CR form filled out. Any questions on that?
Mike, are you going to go over the CR removal form by any chance?
Not right now. The CR removal form, I'll do it at a 10,000 foot level. It has different options for the buyer to remove contingencies. He could do, he could waive all the contingencies, and there's a box there. There's another box that says he removes all the contingencies except, and you complete whatever you're not removing. Or the other paragraph is line by line, you're checking the box as to what contingencies are removed.
Right.
Basically, those are the three different ways of removing contingencies.
I just filled one of those out, and it's just the way the language is worded, particularly in the exceptions and for the investigation of property. It just seems a little bit confusing. I really wish that they would make it a little bit clearer, but.
Well, we could do a separate class on a couple forms, and CR would be one of them.
That would be great.
Okay, let me write that down. Okay.
Can you briefly talk about that informational access to property under L3?
Yes. So investigation of property, you could remove your contingency of investigation of property. However, informational access to property, buyer has the right to go into the property, whether the investigation of property is removed or not. For example, say I want to take my contractor through the property. He has the right to, number one, go in there. He has a right to do inspections. He has the right to do whatever he wants. You have the right to go in there as a buyer, whether you have the investigation of property contingency in place or removed. And the information access to property, the default is 17 days. So a buyer's provided access legally per the contract, can go into the property to do inspections, or to go in there for measurements, to go in there for the interior decorator, to do that, whether you have a contingency or not. After 17 days, seller doesn't have to let you in. So that 17 days information access to property is the right for a buyer to get in, regardless of whether there's a contingency or not on the property.
Right.
Did that answer you, Meg?
Yeah. You just have to hope your buyer doesn't go crazy and want to get in like every day or some
Well,
stupid thing like that.
I think that's where you coach your buyer to that, but there is availability for the buyer to go in there, and that sometimes comes into play when after the contract is signed, the seller says, I'm not letting anyone in because there's no contingencies. You got to refer to paragraph L3 and say the buyer has the right to get in regardless if there's contingencies or not. Okay, last contingency is the sale of the buyer's property. And that would be L8. And if there is, the default is that that's not a contingency on the contract. But if it is, you need to check the box and that COP form is attached. And that is where the property, the contract is contingent on the buyer selling his property. Again, default is 17 days on all these contingencies. And the default is an L8 that's not a contingent sale of a buyer's property selling. Okay. Possession, paragraph M. M1, time of possession. Okay, they changed it from the previous contract to, it used to be, the default was, I think, 6 p.m. Now it is upon notice of recordation. So you can record, sometimes I had a recording today and I got notified at 8:45 a.m. that it's officially on record. Buyer's entitled to the keys upon when it recorded. I kind of like that better than waiting for the buyer not to have the keys until 6 p.m. when they're actually the owner of record. So default is upon notice of the recording. You could still check the box to say 6 p.m. or a certain time. And or it may not be on the date specified. We'll talk about on the TOPA, which is where a tenant occupied property is in there. So time of possession, you would date of recording is the time of recording is the default. Now, seller occupied or vacant units, this is where the date of the date of occupancy, and it could be, if it's a seller occupied, it could be days after the close of escrow. Now, there's two forms. There is a form which is called the SIP form, which is for 29 days or less. and that's where you would check the box under time for performance. If it's more than 30 days or more, you would use the RLAS form and you would check the second box under time for performance. And additional terms explains which form to use. There's a big difference. The SIP form is a short version of an occupancy agreement. The RLAS, I think, is a 5 or 6 page form, which is more in detail, and rightfully so if it's more than 30 days. But regardless, if it's seller occupied, you need one of those forms. There's a third form that we have under KW, which is used for up to 60 days. And that was a form that our attorney did, which is kind of nice so that you could do a short version like the SIP, but allows you up to 60 days. And your operations manager will have that form. Or your TC in our offices has that form.
So can we skip the RLAS? It is, wording is so complicated in that, and use the KW form, or we
Yes.
have to use?
You could
Okay.
use the KW form. If you're writing up the offer, you could use the KW form, just reference it in other terms and conditions that the KW the seller occupancy form will be used in place of the RLAS form. Just
Okay.
you need to, on the contract, put that down,
Okay, thank you.
okay? Regardless, if the seller's occupying the property, you gotta have a seller occupancy form. Whether it's, depending on what the length of it is, you better have one. Failure to have a seller occupancy form puts your buyer in tremendous jeopardy. God forbid, if you close escrow, seller's in there for a length of time, there's no seller occupancy agreement, and the seller doesn't want to move out. Now you got to get the tenant, now you got to get the seller out of the property, and there's nothing written to say that. And it could take 6 months to get a guy out if you don't have the proper forms. So please, if the seller is not delivering the property on the notice of recording, you need to have an agreement signed by both parties. Okay, so that's if the seller's occupied. The third version, if it's occupied or vacant, the third version is that if it's occupied by a tenant or someone else that is not the seller. And let me give you an example of someone else, not the seller, could be maybe the seller's children. They don't want to move out. You got to have an agreement for whoever is in the property, whether it be an official tenant or anyone else that's not the seller. And that is where that TOPA comes in. And that TOPA is a form that identifies who's in there right now and when they're going to move. Now, that TOPA agreement, even if say the tenant is in there right now, you make the offer, but the seller says that tenant's going to be out prior to close of escrow, you still need that TOPA form signed. So just put that in the little lighting up over your head, that if there's someone else other than the seller and someone occupying the property, you need a TOPA form.
What if the tenant is the buyer?
That's okay.
So
That's okay, because they're the principal who's buying the property. I don't think you need a TOPA form.
okay, all right, thanks.
Now the question is the people that are in there, are they buying the property, or do they maybe have a roommate that is not buying the property?
They're buying it.
Okay, I'm just saying, in the scenario where the tenant is buying the property, yet the tenant has someone else that's not buying the property in there, then you need a topo form,
Okay, all right.
all right?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Okay,
Mike, can I just be totally clear on this? Because
Yeah.
it does say tenant occupied. Should it just literally be if there's any other person other than the seller that we need the topo form?
yeah, but you know what?
Hmm.
If we would be able to have a cool CAR form TOPA,
Hmm.
if you put tenant occupied or anybody else, that would change it to tenant occupied, TOOALCE
Mhm.
addendum. So let's keep it at TOPA and it makes it easier.
But
So you're-
but it means even any relative. It doesn't have.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone other than the seller.
Got it. Okay.
And the seller typically may be, I mean, it could be the mom and dad are the sellers, but the 3 kids are still living in the property.
Mhm.
The adult 3 kids are still living in the property, and they are not the sellers.
Right.
So that's where the topo will come in.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, all right, let's finish off paragraph 9. Paragraph N. N1. This is where the seller's required to perform on the dates. So we had earlier, we talked about the 17-day contingencies, but these is what the seller's obligated to do. He needs to deliver all the documents to the buyer within 7 days of acceptance, or check the box. It might be 1 day after acceptance. There's sign and return escrow holder provisions and instructions. The 5 days, the title company will be giving the seller things for them to sign. Time to pay the fees for ordering the HOA documents. I surely hope that the seller's agent has already ordered the HOA docs before you get into contract. But that's the obligation there. So they need to order the HOA docs within 3 days of acceptance. The N4 is the smoke alarms, the carbon monoxide and water heater bracing. That's important because it says it needs to be done within 7 days after acceptance, because if it's not done, and you might want to change that in your offer, because the appraiser you want to have them done prior to the appraiser going into the property. They're kind of the gatekeepers, making sure that this stuff is done. And the appraiser will not release his appraisal until he sees that is done. So if it's not done, the appraiser goes out there, he might charge for another scheduled appointment and charge more money to verify that the work is being done. So I like to have that. If it's not done, and it shows in the inspection or whatever, I'd like to change that from 7 to a lot less time to make sure that the seller takes care of that. And then this N5 is if the seller is signing on behalf of a corporation, an estate, or anything where it's not his own property, but it's an entity that is being used, or a power of attorney, you would need to have the need to provide evidence to the buyer and to the title company that the person that's signing has a legal right to sign on behalf of the entity that they're signing on. So these are sellers' requirements and the timeframes. Any question on that?
Looks good. Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna do one last one. We got a couple minutes left. And this is a problem that came up in one of our transactions this year. P1 talks about anything that is included with the sale of the property that I would view as could be a personal property. Could be a fixture, could be personal property, but you have to check the box of everything that's included. Okay? In P1. In P2 would be anything that is not included. Let me give you my what could have been a horror story. We had a deal where the seller was advertising a whole list of furniture that was going with the property. And I'm talking about expensive furniture, expensive rugs. This was I can't remember, I think this was a $4 million sale. So I'm talking about restoration hardware type outdoor furniture. I'm talking about expensive rugs. The seller even went and with the agent as part of their advertising, put down the list and had the sellers initial it and the buyer initialed it as to what was going to be alleged to have come with the property. There was $100,000 worth of stuff if you had to put a price tag to it. Yet it wasn't addressed in P1. What happens there?
That means it's just outside of the sale. It's not included in the contract. So then it's a bill of sale if it's transferred as personal property. Is that what you mean?
Well, worse than that, it's not included in the contract. Does the seller need to leave it anymore?
No, if it's not.
No, it does not. Even the seller initialed that page. The problem is we assumed that all that property would be transferred with the sale. It needs to be in the contract to obligate the seller to transfer it with the sale. And it
What ended
wasn't.
up happening in that case?
What ended up happening with that case was we didn't go to court. The seller and the buyer negotiated what was minimum on a part of what the buyer wanted. And the seller was okay with it. So out of the $100,000 worth of material, I would say the buyer got about 10 to 15,000. I could be wrong, but it was negotiated. Now, what could have happened was that it relieved the seller of bringing of not having to transfer the items. It didn't necessarily relieve the seller's agent because that was advertising, and we may have had a shot going after the seller's agent, or the buyer may have had a shot going after the seller's agent for the list. But I guarantee you it wouldn't have been just the seller's agent. He would have gone after us too. And there could have been potential that $40,000 or $50,000 of her commission would have been given back to the buyer. That could have happened. So I'm bringing that up to you to make sure that even if there's a list of things that the seller acknowledges that they're going to leave, please put it in the contract. What could have happened was other terms and conditions in the contract could have said the list, the attached list shall be included in the sale. And as long as it's referenced in the contract with the, see attached addendum, that would have been fine without checking the box. But there was nothing in the contract obligating the seller to leave those items. I don't care if the seller signed that piece of paper saying they acknowledged the list. We didn't tie the seller to having to make that part of the contract. Do you guys understand that? You're never going to make that mistake, right?
We're not, no.
Okay, cool.
I have a question, Mike.
I mean, it's important, guys. I mean, this could have been a problem, and not a problem that a couple $100 makes it go away. This could have been $100,000 worth of problem.
Mike, we have like everybody, I've observed like many listings which has, the cars parked in front of the driveway. And let's say if somebody, let's say I write up an offer and I check all these boxes, video doorbells, whatever, right? And then the additional items included, I write whatever is included in the photographs. And
No, I don't think you would do that, Art.
no, I wouldn't do that, but like,
No, that has nothing to do with it. Having photographs have nothing to do with what is included or not included. Bottom line is, I'm gonna leave you off with this, because our time is running out. P1, if there's stuff that you want included in the property, address it. And if you don't want to address it in P1, address it in a separate addendum, like I would have done on that $4 million house. I would have checked all the boxes that were appropriate. And then I would have put in the other terms and conditions, see attached list, which see attached list, dated whatever, or exhibit 1. And these items shall be included in the sale. That's all I'm saying. If you don't put it down, it's not obligating the seller. With that note, I'll take a minute of questions and then I'll have you go on your way, and I'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
So can we just check additional items included, put a check mark and then say all the list of items
Sure.
in the ad in
No,
MLS?
I
No.
would say in the attached document.
Addendum. Okay,
I
so we
would-
need
I
to
would
add
have
an
that-
addendum.
I would have that part of the offer, not something separate. You need to tie it to the purchase agreement.
So we click that and add an addendum there and then,
See
Type
it,
it
see
in.
addendum 1.
okay, got it.
That at least that's tying the seller to the obligation.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else that we want to cover today? I'll stick around for a minute. If you guys, whoever wants to stick around and has questions, that's fine. If not, thank you very much. And I'll see you tomorrow, 1 o'clock. We're going to start sharp. Okay.
Thanks, Mike. See you then.
All right,
Bye.
guys. Take care. Thanks.